The grand hall stretched wide, a cathedral of polished steel and glass that shimmered under the artificial sunlight of the station's dome. Every corner was lined with humans and alien dignitaries, their shapes, colors, and sizes a chaotic display of the galaxy's diversity. Commander Lyra Ardent leaned casually against the polished steel railing, watching as Captain Rohan Dax adjusted the straps of his ceremonial armor. The plates gleamed in the warm light, etched with intricate patterns that symbolized his victories in countless battles. But Lyra wasn't impressed by the decorations. "That thing must weigh more than your ego," she said with a playful smirk, tapping the chest plate with the tip of her gloved finger. Rohan turned his head slowly, the corners of his mouth lifting into a faint, knowing smile. He looked down at Lyra, his eyes calm but sharp, like a predator assessing its surroundings. "Better a heavy ego than a light shield," he replied, the amusement in his voice almost hidden beneath the serious tone he always carried in public. The assembled aliens, mostly Jarlians, stiffened at the humor. The Jarlians were tall, slender creatures, their translucent skin showing faintly glowing veins beneath the surface. They had come to believe that humor was a primitive trait, a human weakness. To them, Lyra's joke seemed reckless, a breach of decorum in a room designed for negotiation and intimidation. But the humans around her laughed quietly, some exchanging sly glances, sharing the secret that they understood the unspoken rules of this dangerous dance. Lyra pushed herself off the railing and moved closer to Rohan, stepping lightly over the polished floor that reflected her boots. "Seriously," she said, her voice low enough that only he could hear, "do you ever worry that someone might take you seriously and snap?" He adjusted the armor straps once more and let out a slow breath, feeling the familiar weight on his shoulders. It had protected him through countless skirmishes, countless battles on planets no human would have believed survivable. Yet in this moment, in front of an audience that expected humans to be weak and naive, he felt a different kind of confidence, a quiet, almost mischievous confidence that came from knowing that strength wasn't always in the armor. A horn sounded at the far end of the hall, deep and resonant, echoing off the steel walls. It was a signal for the negotiations to begin. Lyra's eyes flicked toward the center, where the Jarlians had arranged their council. Their leader, a tall figure with a crystalline head that refracted light in sharp, blinding patterns, regarded the humans with a mix of curiosity and disdain. It was clear they expected chaos, confusion, or fear. Humans, in their estimation, were unpredictable and ill-prepared. But humans were also clever, and cleverness often wore the mask of recklessness. Rohan's hand rested lightly on his hip, brushing over the polished metal of his armor. He glanced at Lyra, and she could see the thought forming in his mind. Slowly, deliberately, he unclasped the shoulder plates. The hall's attention shifted immediately. The metal fell away with a soft clatter, sliding to the floor as though it had never been part of him. Gasps rippled through the audience, some quiet, some audible even over the humming of the hall's energy systems. Lyra felt her breath catch. She had known this would shock them, but seeing it happen in real time, the full effect of it, was something different entirely. Rohan stood there, tall and unarmored, muscles taut beneath the ceremonial clothing, the air around him seeming to hum with quiet authority. He didn't move defensively, didn't tense as the alien eyes scrutinized him. He simply stood, calm and unyielding. The Jarlians, despite their advanced technology and millennia of evolution, were silent. Their scanners should have detected vulnerability, weakness, yet they found none. Instead, they detected unpredictability, adaptability, and a confidence that no machine or armor could measure. Lyra stepped closer, unconsciously mirroring his calm. "Rohan," she began, the word a soft warning, a reminder of the risks. But he lifted a hand and she stopped mid-step, sensing the authority behind the gesture. "Let them see what they doubt," he said quietly, his voice carrying in the vast hall. A murmur ran through the room, rising and falling like waves against a shore. The humans had expected this reaction. The aliens, however, were beginning to realize that their assumptions about human weakness might have been completely wrong. Rohan's calm was a weapon more potent than any blade or shield. One of the Jarlians stepped forward, their crystalline head bending slightly as if to focus better on this anomaly before them. "Are you prepared to fight, human?" the alien asked, their voice mechanical yet laced with curiosity. Rohan's smile was slow, almost playful. "I don't need this," he said, tapping the empty space where his armor had been. The hall's silence deepened, almost physical, pressing against the walls, the ceiling, the gathered bodies. For the first time, the assembled diplomats and warriors sensed that humans might be something entirely different from the races they had catalogued, studied, and dismissed for centuries. Lyra's pulse quickened, not out of fear, but out of awe. She had always known humans were remarkable, but the full effect of Rohan's simple gesture, removing his armor, standing unarmed and unafraid, was something the galaxy had never seen before. The horn sounded again, signaling the formal start of the talks. Delegates moved into position, their movements stiff, wary, almost fearful. Lyra watched as Rohan shifted slightly, surveying the room with precise awareness. Every subtle gesture, every breath, every slight tilt of his head carried a message. Humans were not to be underestimated. Across the hall, the Jarlians whispered among themselves, their voices like the sound of glass grinding on glass. They were analyzing, recalculating, attempting to understand the unpredictable variables humans had introduced. For them, uncertainty was dangerous. For humans, it was a tool. Lyra's mind raced as she considered the implications. In past encounters, humans had relied on technology, on armor, on sheer firepower. But here, in this hall, stripped of the usual trappings, humans had made a statement with nothing more than presence and poise. The Jarlians would remember this moment, and they would adjust their perception. Humans were not animals to be herded. They were something else entirely, something the galaxy might fear in the future. Rohan's gaze fell on Lyra, and he raised an eyebrow, the smallest of gestures that somehow carried enormous weight. Lyra responded with a slight nod, an acknowledgement of trust, of understanding. Together, they stood as symbols of human audacity, the calm in the eye of a storm that the galaxy believed they could not weather. A young human soldier, barely 20, stepped nervously near Rohan, his hands shaking slightly as he clutched the ceremonial spear. Rohan turned his head, offering a reassuring nod, silent encouragement that this soldier would survive the scrutiny of the hall. Confidence spread like wildfire. Where one human felt fear, another found courage. Where aliens saw weakness, humans discovered opportunity. Time stretched in the hall, moments folding over themselves as tension and curiosity battled for dominance. Every eye was on the unarmored captain, yet none dared act. The air vibrated with unspoken questions. Could humans really fight without protection? Could they defy probability? Could they stand against a galaxy that assumed them fragile and expendable? Lyra's heartbeat synchronized with the subtle hum of the hall's energy systems. She had faced impossible odds before, but nothing compared to the collective scrutiny of the galaxy's most calculating diplomats and warriors. And yet, standing beside Rohan, she felt the impossible become possible. Then, without warning, Rohan moved. Not in aggression, not in defiance, but in a simple, deliberate gesture. He adjusted the cloak draped over his shoulders, the fabric shifting with a whisper of motion. Every subtle movement conveyed control, mastery over the environment, and a confidence that was intoxicating to humans and terrifying to aliens. The hall seemed to shrink around him, every eye drawn to the display of calm strength. Lyra realized in that moment that humans had a power beyond tools, beyond weapons, beyond armor. They had will. They had creativity. They had the audacity to defy expectation and, in doing so, bend the perception of every other species in the room. The first part of the negotiation had begun, and yet the true battle had already been won. Not through violence, not through cleverness alone, but through sheer presence. The quiet, terrifying, beautiful presence of humanity at its most confident and fearless. And in that silence, stretching across the hall like a tangible force, humans and aliens alike sensed something they had not anticipated. That sometimes the greatest strength lies not in what you wear, but in the courage to stand without it. Lyra smiled faintly, letting herself feel the thrill of the moment. She had mocked his armor as a joke, yes, but what Rohan had shown in response was no joke. It was a demonstration of human audacity, and it would echo across the galaxy for years to come. The horn sounded once more, marking the formal start of proceedings. Rohan and Lyra moved forward together, unarmored but unbowed, confident that this first impression would shape the negotiations to come. The Jarlians watched, stunned, their carefully calibrated expectations shattered in the quietest, most human way imaginable. It was a beginning, and everyone in the hall knew it. Humans had reminded the galaxy that strength was more than metal, more than energy shields, more than anything anyone could measure. Strength was heart, mind, nerve, and presence, and for the first time the galaxy was paying attention. The hall remained silent after Rohan removed his armor, the weight of his presence filling every corner. The Jarlians' crystalline heads tilted slightly, scanning, calculating, but their advanced sensors could not measure what they were truly witnessing. Humans, they realized, did not fit the predictable patterns of fear or obedience. Instead, they radiated something entirely foreign, controlled audacity. Lyra moved beside Rohan, her eyes scanning the room as she noticed subtle signs of tension among the alien delegates. Even the senior diplomats, known for their composure and centuries of negotiation experience, were whispering nervously among themselves. The murmurs were quiet, but human ears were keen, trained to notice even the slightest shift in tone or expression. Humans had learned long ago that observation could be as lethal as any weapon. Rohan stepped forward deliberately, unarmored, his cloak brushing softly against the polished floor. Each step was measured, confident, and entirely intentional. He was showing them that humans did not rely on metal or energy shields to define their strength. That simple act unsettled the Jarlians, who had always assumed that outward protection was necessary for survival. The alien ambassador, a tall figure with a translucent body veined in faintly glowing lines, leaned forward, its voice buzzing with curiosity and authority. "You claim readiness," it said, its tone carefully neutral. "Yet you discard the very protection your species has always valued. How do you expect to survive?" "We survive because we are humans," he said evenly, letting the words hang in the air. "We adapt, we think, and we do not rely solely on what can be measured. You assume strength is visible. We know it is not." The Jarlians were unsettled, struggling to comprehend the paradox before them, a human standing exposed, yet emanating a presence stronger than any armor could provide. Lyra could feel the tension thickening around them. She had faced countless alien delegations, but none had reacted like this. Humans were often underestimated, dismissed as impulsive or reckless. But here, Rohan was proving that human audacity, intelligence, and timing could be more powerful than any technological advantage. Suddenly, a young Jarlian emissary stepped forward, attempting to test the human's resolve. It moved quickly, its long limbs extending toward Rohan, a non-lethal energy probe at the ready. Its motion was precise, calculated to strike fear or force compliance. Rohan's gaze flicked to the probe, his hand moving with lightning speed. Not in panic, not in reaction, but in perfect synchronization with the alien's motion. He intercepted the probe midair, twisting it harmlessly to the side. The move was flawless, almost effortless, and every observer in the hall froze, watching. Lyra felt her pulse quicken. She had trained with Rohan for years, and even she was impressed by the simplicity and elegance of his movements. To the Jarlians, however, it was terrifying. They had expected fear, hesitation, weakness. Instead, they found precision, anticipation, and control. The alien emissary withdrew slightly, its glowing veins pulsing faster, a clear sign of heightened stress. Rohan, still unarmored, took a single step closer, his calm gaze never leaving the alien. "Humans are unpredictable," he said quietly, but loud enough for the entire hall to hear. "You cannot calculate what we will do next. That is both our weakness and our strength." Alien delegates shifted uneasily, glancing at one another as if reassessing every assumption they had about humans. They had studied humanity for decades, cataloged our battles, noted our weaknesses, and yet, standing before them unarmored and composed, Rohan shattered every expectation. Lyra moved closer to him, noticing a subtle shift in his posture, an invisible signal to the young soldiers behind them. They understood instinctively. Stay calm, stay alert, and trust in what humans had always relied upon: ingenuity, courage, and the ability to act in the unpredictable moments that could decide life or death. The horn sounded again, a reminder that the formal negotiation was beginning, yet the hall's attention was elsewhere. It was impossible to ignore the human captain who stood exposed, confident, and entirely in control. Every alien present had to acknowledge a simple truth: humans were not like other species. The alien ambassador, still struggling to maintain composure, attempted a new approach. "We propose a test of skill," it said, its voice deliberate, controlled. "A demonstration of your abilities in a controlled environment. If you succeed, perhaps we may trust your words. Fail and—" Its sentence trailed, a threat implicit in the pause. Rohan's lips curved into the faintest smile. "We accept," he said simply. No hesitation, no fear. Acceptance was a signal, a challenge, and a declaration all in one. Lyra felt a surge of pride. Humans had survived countless battles, yes, but rarely had they been tested in front of such a diverse audience with stakes that could affect an entire galaxy. And yet here they were, calm, prepared, and unafraid. The test began. A series of energy drones, designed to mimic combat situations, were released into the hall, buzzing aggressively toward the humans. Other alien observers whispered amongst themselves, confident that humans would falter without armor or shields. Rohan moved first, fluid and deliberate. His body shifted with a grace that seemed impossible for someone without protective gear. He deflected an incoming energy pulse with nothing but his hand, twisting an emotion that would have torn lesser bodies apart. The drone malfunctioned, spinning off course, harmlessly colliding with a wall. Lyra followed his lead, dodging and weaving, her movements instinctive and precise. The young soldiers behind them mimicked their motions, relying not on armor but on timing, coordination, and the trust instilled in them by their leaders. One by one, the drones were neutralized, each failure a testament to human adaptability and ingenuity. The Jarlians watched in disbelief. Their calculations, predictions, and strategies, all designed to anticipate human behavior, were failing. Every move Rohan and Lyra made was unexpected, yet effective. It was as if humans had rewritten the rules of engagement simply by refusing to follow them. When the last drone fell, the hall was silent. The Jarlians' collective breath seemed to hold, the weight of recognition settling over them. Humans were dangerous, not because of technology, but because of audacity, skill, and the willingness to embrace uncertainty. The alien ambassador stepped forward, this time without its usual air of superiority. "Remarkable," it said almost grudgingly. "You defy expectation. But some strength cannot be measured, it must be witnessed." The council attempted to regain control, calling for formal protocols, reminders of etiquette and diplomacy. But the momentum had shifted. Humans, standing unarmored yet unafraid, had changed the dynamic. Every word spoken now carried a new weight. The aliens had to consider the possibility that human ingenuity and courage could outweigh the advantages of technology and tradition. Lyra glanced at Rohan. His calm demeanor masked the sharpness of his mind, the readiness for any scenario, the understanding that the hall's silence was as potent a weapon as any sword or shield. He had turned a simple act, removing his armor, into a statement of strategy, of power, and of human identity. One of the younger human soldiers, emboldened by Rohan's example, stepped forward and executed a series of maneuvers that neutralized a mock threat more efficiently than any armored veteran might have expected. Lyra's chest swelled with pride. Humanity was demonstrating that courage, intelligence, and unpredictability could triumph over technology alone. The Jarlians, sensing the shift, huddled among themselves. Their calculations, their centuries of experience, their rigid expectations, all had failed in the face of simple human audacity. For the first time, they were forced to reconsider the species they had once dismissed. Humans were not a minor threat, not a curiosity to be watched. They were something far more formidable. Rohan moved back toward Lyra, signaling an end to the demonstration. "We fight when we must," he said quietly, loud enough for the closest aliens to hear. "We survive because we adapt. We do not rely on what can be measured. That is the nature of humanity." Aliens and humans alike knew that the future of negotiation had changed in these moments. Humans had shown that they were unpredictable, courageous, and capable of turning assumptions into weapons. Lyra exhaled slowly, realizing that what had begun as a simple mockery of armor had evolved into a profound declaration. Humans were not fragile. Humans were not predictable. And humans, standing unafraid in the face of judgment and threat, were beginning to reshape the galaxy's understanding of power. As the formal negotiation resumed, the Jarlians' tone was measured, cautious. They no longer assumed humans would react as expected. Each word, each gesture was now filtered through the lens of uncertainty. For the first time, humans were not merely participants. They were the standard against which others would measure courage and ingenuity. Lyra looked at Rohan and allowed herself a small smile. What had begun as a joke had revealed a deeper truth. Human presence alone could command respect. And the hall, once a place of tension and hierarchy, had become a stage on which humans could assert, quietly but undeniably, that they were forces to be reckoned with. The first part of the negotiation was over, yet its echoes would last far longer than anyone in the hall could have anticipated. Humans had stepped into the silence, and in that silence they had spoken volumes. The air in the hall had shifted. What had begun as a ceremonial negotiation was no longer merely a test of words or protocol. The Jarlians, once confident in their superiority, were now uncertain, their calculations failing against humans who refused to behave predictably. Rohan and Lyra moved together, unarmored yet unbowed, a silent declaration that humans were not governed by the same rules as the rest of the galaxy. Rohan's eyes swept across the assembled delegates, noticing every subtle reaction, the twitch of a limb, the flicker of glowing veins beneath translucent skin, the tightening of claws. He understood instinctively that perception was as important as action. A battle could be won without firing a single shot if the opponent doubted themselves first. Lyra followed his gaze, her own instincts alert. She knew the Jarlians had prepared countless contingency plans for any human action, yet here they were, faltering under the simplicity of courage and presence. She caught the flicker of a thought in one young alien officer, a plan being reconsidered, discarded, replaced by uncertainty. Humans had forced doubt into the minds of beings who prided themselves on calculation. The alien ambassador cleared its throat, a sharp, clicking sound that reverberated through the hall. "You have demonstrated physical skill and composure," it said, its voice careful, almost cautious. "But intellect matters as much as reflexes. Can your species navigate strategy where technology alone cannot decide the outcome?" The Jarlians, still untrusting, initiated a controlled scenario. Holographic projections of a battlefield appeared across the hall, stretching floor to ceiling. Ships, weaponry, and defensive grids simulated an attack on a human colony. Delegates assumed the humans would analyze patterns, submit calculations, and follow predictable defensive protocols. Instead, Rohan stepped forward, unarmored, and examined the projection with nothing but his eyes and intuition. He moved his hands, pointing, shifting, rearranging simulated units in ways that violated conventional strategy. Lyra watched closely, realizing that Rohan was not following patterns. He was creating possibilities. Humans did not merely solve problems, they invented solutions on the spot. A small Jarlian officer scowled, attempting to challenge his logic. "Your approach is chaotic," it said, its voice rising in frustration. "It defies reason. How can it succeed?" Uncertainty is where humans excel. For the first time, they were not analyzing a human. They were trying to anticipate a mind that would not be contained. One of the younger human officers, encouraged by Rohan's confidence, took initiative. Without waiting for orders, he proposed a sequence of maneuvers that complemented Rohan's adjustments. Within moments, the projection showed a flawless victory scenario, humans outmaneuvering superior technology through improvisation and insight. The room erupted in a quiet gasp. The Jarlians had expected calculation, pattern recognition, logic. They had not expected creativity, audacity, or intuition. Humans were rewriting the rules of engagement before their eyes. Lyra moved beside Rohan, whispering, "They've never seen this before. None of them has ever faced humans like this." More holographic projections appeared, this time simulating multiple colonies under simultaneous threat. The aliens expected humans to be overwhelmed, to falter, to rely on technology to compensate for sheer numbers. Rohan smiled faintly. "Numbers don't intimidate humans," he said softly, almost to himself. Then he turned to the assembly, his voice carrying across the hall with a calm authority that made even the Jarlians pause. "We adapt, we prioritize, we make choices based on observation, intuition, and courage. Predictability is weakness, uncertainty is opportunity." A strategy designed to test human reaction had instead revealed something far more unsettling. Their assumptions about control were fragile, and humans exploited that fragility instinctively. One of the Jarlians attempted a countermeasure, activating an advanced AI to simulate human decisions and predict outcomes. The projection flickered, then stabilized, yet the humans were already acting beyond its calculations. Every move they made defied algorithms, statistics, and probability models. The AI produced endless variations, yet none matched the improvisation of the humans in the room. Rohan moved through the projections, adjusting tactics, issuing silent commands, shifting units with a precision born not of calculation, but of instinct and experience. Lyra noticed the young soldiers mimicking his movements, understanding that human success was as much about trust and cohesion as it was about skill. Together, they operated as a single organism, each part anticipating the others, each action complementing the whole. The Jarlians' frustration was palpable. Their whispers became urgent, a chorus of confusion and disbelief. They had underestimated human capacity for adaptation, improvisation, and foresight. What they had assumed would be a simple demonstration of predictability had become a masterclass in human ingenuity. Lyra glanced at Rohan as he paused, observing the projections with calm scrutiny. "We need to escalate," he murmured. His tone was quiet, but the meaning was clear. The humans could no longer simply respond. They needed to take initiative to shape the situation before the aliens could react. He gestured again, and the simulations shifted, illustrating coordinated offensive and defensive strategies that integrated the strengths of every human unit. They moved fluidly, balancing aggression with defense, ingenuity with improvisation. The hall held its breath. The Jarlians realized that humans had not merely learned the rules, they were rewriting them live in real time without hesitation. One delegate, a senior officer with years of experience, muttered under its breath, "They are not just unpredictable, they are dangerous." Humans, despite being unarmored, unshielded, and seemingly vulnerable, were demonstrating qualities the Jarlians could not quantify: courage, foresight, improvisation, and cohesion. In a single demonstration, humans had shifted the balance of perception. They were no longer a minor species to be monitored. They were a force to be respected, even feared. Lyra's heart swelled with pride as she watched Rohan move through the projections, adjusting and optimizing strategies with effortless skill. He embodied the essence of humanity in that moment: clever, audacious, and fearless. She understood more clearly than ever that humans had survived and thrived not because of technology, but because of their ability to think, adapt, and act decisively under pressure. The final projection showed the collapse of the simulated attack. Every colony was defended, every strategic point secured, every threat neutralized. The Jarlians sat in stunned silence, their calculations proven inadequate. Humans had turned the test into a demonstration of complete dominance, not through force alone, but through ingenuity, courage, and cohesion. Rohan turned to Lyra, his expression calm but triumphant. "They'll have to adjust their plans now," he said quietly. "They won't underestimate humans again." "Your species exceeds expectation," it said slowly. "We will need to reconsider our approach. Humans are unpredictable." What had begun as a test had become a revelation. Humanity was no longer just a participant in galactic affairs. It was a force to be considered, respected, and if necessary, feared. Lyra exhaled slowly, feeling the weight of what they had accomplished. This was not victory in the conventional sense. There had been no combat, no violence, no overt confrontation. Yet in the quiet of the hall, humans had won something far more important: acknowledgement, recognition, respect. The galaxy had been forced to pay attention, and humans had done so on their own terms, unarmored, unafraid, and entirely themselves. As the humans prepared to step back, the Jarlians whispered among themselves, recalibrating their strategies and expectations. They had been forced to confront a truth they could not ignore. Human ingenuity, courage, and adaptability were qualities that could not be predicted, controlled, or contained. Rohan and Lyra exchanged a glance, sharing a moment of silent understanding. Humans had proven something profound. Strength was not always visible, and courage was a weapon in itself. They had turned a simple test into a demonstration of the very essence of humanity, a species that survived, thrived, and dominated not through technology alone, but through audacity, intelligence, and an unbreakable will. The hall would never forget this day. The hall was quieter than it had ever been, yet the silence vibrated with tension. The Jarlians, still struggling to understand what they had witnessed, whispered among themselves in tones of disbelief. Their centuries of experience had prepared them for many threats: advanced technology, brute force, coordinated attacks, but nothing had prepared them for the audacity, ingenuity, and calm confidence of humanity. Humans, standing unarmored and unflinching, had disrupted their calculations, rewriting the rules of interaction in real time. Rohan moved through the hall slowly, deliberately. Every step was confident, every gesture measured. He was aware of the weight of attention upon him, yet he carried it as naturally as he had carried his armor in countless battles. But now he did not need metal plates to command presence. His very posture, the quiet strength radiating from him, was enough to alter perception. Lyra followed closely, noting the way the younger human soldiers moved instinctively around him, mirroring his calm, confident energy. The humans had become a single organism, each member understanding that unpredictability and trust were their greatest weapons. They did not rely solely on technology, shields, or brute force. Their strength came from thought, adaptation, and nerve. The Jarlian ambassador, still struggling to regain composure, stepped forward. Its crystalline head refracted the hall's light, creating a dazzling array of flashes across the floor. "Your species continues to defy expectations," it said carefully, its voice carrying an undercurrent of unease. "You demonstrate skill, courage, and creativity, but do you have the discipline to follow protocol? To respect the chain of command and the boundaries of negotiation? Humans have learned to survive not by following patterns, but by creating them." The Jarlians expected chaos to overwhelm the humans. They expected hesitation, mistakes, or fear. Instead, Rohan stepped forward, observing the scenarios with calm scrutiny. His fingers traced invisible paths in the air, and the projections shifted in response. Each movement anticipated problems the simulations had not considered. Human strategies emerged, not from calculation alone, but from instinct, creativity, and adaptability. Lyra watched as the projections moved, responding seamlessly to Rohan's guidance. Every maneuver was efficient and effective, yet flexible enough to adapt to changing conditions. The humans were not just participating in the simulations. They were shaping them, creating possibilities the Jarlians could not predict. One of the younger human officers took initiative, offering a bold solution that integrated Rohan's guidance with her own insight. The projection shifted again, demonstrating a flawless response to multiple simultaneous threats. The hall remained silent, but the tension was palpable. The Jarlians were forced to confront a harsh reality. Humans could not be controlled, predicted, or contained. The ambassador's voice, usually calm and commanding, trembled slightly. "You are exceptional," it said. "But this is a controlled scenario. Real conflict involves risk, casualties, and the unknown. Can your species truly endure under pressure?" Humans had never needed validation to survive. They had learned long ago that courage and cleverness could outweigh technology and numbers. Yet here, in the center of the galaxy's elite, their qualities were not just surviving, they were dominating. The ambassador motioned subtly, activating another simulation. This time, it was a direct challenge, a coordinated attack on multiple human outposts, requiring rapid decision-making, resource management, and tactical precision. The Jarlians assumed the humans would falter. They expected hesitation, missed calculations, and errors in judgment. Rohan's eyes narrowed slightly as he studied the scenario. He stepped closer to the projections, moving his hands with deliberate intent. The human officers followed instinctively, reorganizing units, redirecting resources, and neutralizing threats before they could escalate. Each decision was precise yet flexible, allowing for adaptation to unexpected variables. The hall watched in awe. The simulations that had been designed to test humans had become demonstrations of human mastery. Rohan and his team were not merely surviving. They were outthinking the simulation itself, solving problems in ways that the Jarlians had not anticipated. Lyra moved to the side, noting how the younger soldiers absorbed the lessons of Rohan's movements. They were learning quickly, understanding that success depended not on following instructions blindly, but on observation, adaptation, and courage. Humans had created a culture of rapid learning, and it was on full display before the galaxy's elite. The Jarlians whispered among themselves, tension rising. Their assumptions had been shattered repeatedly. Humans were not only clever, they were fearless, adaptable, and capable of improvisation on a scale they could not measure. Every calculation they had made about humanity's potential was being proven insufficient. Rohan paused, observing the simulation's outcomes. He turned slightly, addressing the hall. "You may measure shields, weapons, and fleets," he said. "You may assume advantage in every calculation, but humans are not defined by what can be measured. We are defined by our choices, our courage, and our creativity. That is the difference between surviving and thriving." Humans were no longer participants in this test. They were the standard against which all strategies would be judged. The Jarlians understood that they were facing a species that could not be fully predicted, controlled, or dismissed. A senior Jarlian officer, long accustomed to commanding fleets and overseeing planetary defenses, muttered under its breath. "They are more than we imagined." Another simulation appeared, this time involving resource allocation, diplomacy, and negotiation with multiple alien species. It was designed to test human strategic thinking under pressure, combining logistical challenges with political complexity. Rohan stepped forward, analyzing the scenario. His hands moved gracefully, redirecting resources, coordinating alliances, and neutralizing threats through subtle manipulation rather than force. Lyra and the younger officers followed, their movements precise, adaptive, and instinctively coordinated. The Jarlians watched in astonishment. Humans were demonstrating a mastery of complexity that no simulation had anticipated. They were solving problems not through brute force but through insight, coordination, and the audacity to act in unexpected ways. The ambassador finally spoke again, its voice subdued. "Your species is exceptional," it said. "We underestimated you. We assumed predictability, compliance, and weakness. We were wrong." "We are human," he said simply. "We survive because we adapt, we thrive because we think, and we succeed because we do not fear the unknown." The Jarlians, despite their advanced technology and centuries of experience, had been forced to recognize a truth they could not ignore. Humans were unpredictable, clever, and formidable. The hall remained tense, but the dynamic had shifted. Humans were no longer merely participants. They were leaders in this demonstration of skill and strategy. Every decision, every movement, every choice highlighted qualities that no technology could replicate. Humans were shaping the rules, forcing the Jarlians to respond on their terms. Rohan stepped back, signaling the end of the simulations. The outcomes were clear. Humans had not only survived, they had excelled. The Jarlians, silent and humbled, were left to reassess their assumptions about this audacious, clever, and fearless species. Lyra exhaled slowly, feeling the weight of the moment. This was not a victory of weapons or armor. It was a victory of human ingenuity, courage, and the audacity to defy expectation. The Jarlians had been forced to recognize that humans were not just a species to be tolerated, they were a force to be respected. Rohan turned to her, his eyes calm but bright with quiet triumph. "They will not underestimate humans again," he said softly. Lyra nodded, understanding fully. The demonstration had done more than prove skill, it had altered perception. Humans had shown that true strength was not always visible, that courage and intelligence could outweigh even the most advanced technology. The hall, once filled with doubt and expectation, now hummed with a new energy. Humans had emerged as a standard of ingenuity and audacity. The Jarlians, humbled and attentive, were forced to consider a future in which humans were neither predictable nor controllable. Rohan and Lyra exchanged a glance, silently acknowledging what had been accomplished. Humanity had proven itself not only capable but formidable, not through brute force, but through presence, intellect, and the courage to stand unarmored and unafraid in the face of expectation. The echoes of their demonstration would resonate far beyond the hall. Across the galaxy, species would take note, and humans would be remembered not just as participants in the galactic order, but as a species that commanded attention, respect, and perhaps even fear. The humans had not only survived, they had reshaped perception, turning audacity into strategy and courage into influence. And in that quiet, charged moment, the galaxy began to understand what humans had always known. Unpredictability, intelligence, and courage were powers beyond measure, and humanity wielded them naturally. The hall was quieter than it had ever been, yet the tension in the air was palpable. Every delegate, every observer, and every soldier seemed to hold their breath. The events of the past hours had shifted the balance of perception completely. Humans, unarmored and unafraid, had demonstrated skill, ingenuity, and courage in ways no one had anticipated. What had begun as a negotiation was now a study in audacity, a lesson in human unpredictability. Rohan Dax stood near the center of the hall, uncluttered by metal armor, uncluttered by pretense. His presence was magnetic, calm, and precise. Lyra Ardent moved alongside him, her posture relaxed yet vigilant. Together, they were not just leaders. They were symbols of what humanity could achieve when audacity and intellect combined. The Jarlians, still recovering from the demonstrations, whispered nervously among themselves. Their calculations, their centuries of diplomatic experience, and their assumptions about humans had all proven insufficient. Humans had shown them that courage, adaptability, and creativity could outweigh technology, numbers, and authority. And now, the aliens were unsure how to proceed. The ambassador, its crystalline form flickering faintly in the hall's light, finally stepped forward. Its voice was measured but held a trace of uncertainty. "You have demonstrated abilities far beyond expectation," it said. "Skill, intellect, and courage that surpass what we thought your species capable of. We concede that we misjudged you. We survive because we think, we innovate, and we act when necessary. We are not defined by what others expect of us, but by what we know we can achieve. Humans had not only survived the challenges, they had rewritten the rules of engagement in this room. The Jarlians attempted a formal declaration of concession, but their words were hesitant, almost reluctant. They were unfamiliar with acknowledging a species they had considered secondary. They were trained to see humans as impulsive, reckless, and fragile. Yet here in the center of the hall stood humans who were calm, resourceful, and entirely in control without weapons, armor, or pretense. One of the younger human officers stepped forward, carrying a subtle signal of deference but also of quiet authority. She had learned from Rohan that strength was as much in perception as in action. Her voice, calm and precise, carried across the hall. "We do not ask for recognition," she said. "We do not need permission to survive or to protect our people. We act because we must, and we act with what we have. That is how humans have always endured and how we always will." Humans were not predictable. Humans were not weak. They had been forced to confront a reality they could not dismiss. Humanity was formidable in ways they had underestimated for centuries. Rohan's gaze swept the hall once more. He noticed a few delegates attempting subtle gestures of alliance, adjusting their stances to reflect newfound respect. The hall, once filled with tension and hierarchy, had become a stage for human authority without the need for aggression. Lyra moved closer to Rohan, her eyes bright. "We've done more than survive," she said quietly. "We've changed how they see us forever." His voice was low but carried across the room, a quiet assertion of human presence. "We do not need to dominate with force. Our strength lies in thought, courage, and resolve. That is something no technology can replicate." The ambassador, acknowledging this, took a deep, measured pause. "It is clear," it said, "that humanity cannot be underestimated. You have proven that in ways no calculation or weapon could predict." And yet in this moment, recognition was unavoidable. Humanity had not only survived scrutiny, they had imposed their will and presence through skill, intellect, and courage. Lyra glanced at the younger human soldiers behind them. Their faces were filled with quiet pride, a reflection of everything humanity represented: resilience, ingenuity, and audacity. They understood now, as had their commanders, that the hall's silence was not empty. It was full of acknowledgement, respect, and a grudging sense of awe. Rohan's hand brushed against the edge of the ceremonial table. He felt the hum of the station beneath his fingertips, the energy systems, the technology that the Jarlians so trusted, and yet he did not rely on it. Humanity had proven that presence, courage, and intelligence were as powerful as the most advanced machines. The ambassador, sensing the shift, attempted a gesture of diplomacy. "We will revise our plans," it said. "We will approach future negotiations with caution and respect. Humans are not as we expected." His tone was calm, but the message was clear. Humans were no longer to be dismissed or underestimated. They were capable, adaptable, and bold. Lyra felt a thrill of pride. Humans had survived countless challenges, yet this was different. This was not a battlefield with guns or shields. This was a battlefield of perception, intellect, and courage. And humanity had prevailed without firing a single shot. The hall began to empty slowly, delegates and observers leaving with whispered discussions and hurried reassessments. The Jarlians would return to their councils, their calculations forever altered. They would speak of the humans who stood unarmored, unafraid, and entirely in control. They would speak of audacity that did not rely on force, of skill that defied prediction, and of courage that could not be measured. Rohan and Lyra moved toward the exit, the younger soldiers following. The hall's echoes carried behind them, not with laughter or applause, but with something heavier: acknowledgement. Humans had made their mark not as aggressors, but as beings whose audacity and intelligence demanded attention. Lyra glanced at Rohan as they stepped into the corridor. "They'll remember this," she said. "Every word, every gesture. We've changed their perception of humanity forever." Humans are not here to be underestimated. That is the lesson we leave behind. But the human spirit, adaptable, fearless, and clever, was unstoppable. As they walked through the corridors of the station, the hum of energy systems surrounding them, Lyra felt a quiet exhilaration. Humans had turned a challenge into a demonstration of their very essence. They had shown that strength was not in what you wore or what weapons you carried, but in the will to act, the courage to stand, and the intelligence to see possibilities where others saw limits. Rohan paused at the edge of the observation deck, overlooking the expanse of the station and the stars beyond. "This is only the beginning," he said softly. Every species that underestimates us will learn the same lesson. Humans survive, humans adapt, humans prevail. This was the essence of HFY, the declaration that humans were not just survivors, but innovators, audacious thinkers, and beings capable of defying expectation. Below them, the station's lights reflected off the metallic surfaces, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch infinitely. The humans on the deck were quiet, but their silence was charged with the weight of achievement. They had faced scrutiny, challenge, and doubt, and they had prevailed. Rohan removed the last clasp of his ceremonial cloak, letting it fall to the floor. Lyra watched, understanding the symbolism. They had begun unarmored, unafraid, and now they were leaving in the same way, having demonstrated that humanity's true strength was never in the armor, the weapons, or the numbers, but in courage, intelligence, and audacity. The Jarlians would speak of this day for years to come. They would tell tales of humans who could outthink, outmaneuver, and outlast even the most advanced species without relying on protection or brute force. And everywhere the story spread, the lesson would be clear. Humanity was not to be underestimated. Lyra turned to Rohan, a small smile forming. "Next time," she said softly, "maybe we let them test their own courage first." The silence they left behind was heavy with awe, acknowledgement, and the unmistakable recognition that humans had rewritten the expectations of the galaxy. Humanity had proven in the quietest and most audacious way that their greatest weapon was not in technology or force, but in heart, mind, and nerve. The stars outside the station seemed to shine a little brighter, as if acknowledging the presence of humans who dared to stand unshielded against doubt, expectation, and fear. And somewhere in the galaxy, across countless worlds and civilizations, the echoes of that lesson would resonate. Never underestimate a human. Humans had survived. Humans had adapted. Humans had prevailed. And the galaxy would never forget it.